Evolutionary.org Hardcore 2.0 is coming your way, episode 198, talking about how to manipulate your estrogen levels by Euro Pharma. This one's a very important topic because estrogen is definitely important when you're on cycle, when you're coming off cycle, between cycles. It can make or break you. And we're going to talk about what to look for in blood work with estrogen, high estrogen risks, low estrogen risks, steroids that can cause estrogen spikes, how to use the ancillaries for estrogen properly, because if you use them incorrectly, you can crash your estrogen. We don't want that either. We're also going to go over to Europharma thoughts and how to cycle your stack to make sure you balance estrogen. First, let me remind everyone we are on Apple, we are on Spotify, we're on many different platforms out there. Whatever platform you're listening to us on, we are on additional platforms. So I like to listen to us on different platforms myself while I'm driving in the car and etc. It's very important that you all participate. This is a community podcast. We're not, we don't buy followers like these other guys. We don't uh, pay a marketing firm to market our podcast. We don't pay the algorithms to pick up our podcast. We're all about it's from the ground up, and we're building this the right way. And over time, it's going to pay off to build it the right way. And you're a big part of it. It's a community podcast. We listen to your comments. We feed off your comments, and we do shows based on your questions that you want us to talk about. So it helps to comment, like, subscribe, smash that like button, smash the 5 out of 5 stars or 10 out of 10 stars on the platforms out there, and that helps us get picked up and other people see the podcast as well, because we want to spread the right information. We don't want these other guys who are spreading misinformation to get more traction. So that's the way we roll. So let's get into it. What to look for in blood work with estrogen. So when you get your blood work done for men, and this podcast is going to be primarily about men. Okay, women have estrogen problems as well, but for men, this is what we're going to focus on because men are the ones that use these aromatizing compounds, which we're going to get into later. So for men, our estrogen should be between 15 and 35 picograms per milliliter. So when you go get blood work done, you'll see those values. Now, there's a lot of debate on where your estrogen levels should be, but this is what I personally believe. And we see the ranges. They could be, I've seen ranges say it should be 30 picograms per milliliter or less. So, in other words, it's okay if it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I disagree with that. I don't think your estrogen levels should be that low. I don't think your estrogen levels should be at 8 or 10 or even 12. I think they should be anywhere from 15 to 35. That's a sweet spot. And vice versa, there's some people that say, "Oh, your estrogen can be okay if it's 40, 50, 60." I disagree with that as well because there's hidden dangers of having high estrogen that you may not notice even though you can get away with it on a cycle. There's hidden dangers that you shouldn't notice. Mobster?
So what we sometimes see on the forums, and I think it's quite often Steve newbies that come up with this suggestion, and occasionally they've spoken to a buddy, which is always a bad idea in this example. When Steve was talking about the idea of the low estrogen, what we see sometimes, Steve, is people say, why shouldn't we use an AI? Why shouldn't I use product X, whatever, to crush my estrogen? With the idea that in their minds, if you've got zero estrogen or very, very low levels of estrogen, as in the numbers that Steve's talked about, then obviously I should be quote unquote have more testosterone or the little bit of testosterone they've got. Sometimes they're looking from a natural, not using steroids point of view, will be that much more anabolic. And the reality of the situation is, like Steve said, women having obviously different physical responses to how estrogen works on their bodies. The idea that you should have the super low or zero estrogen is a bad idea. Arguably, a small amount, a reasonable amount, should I say it, Steve, of estrogen actually works in your favor. So, as a theory, you kind of see where they've got the idea from, but the reality is different. Talk about that briefly, Steve, and then obviously more on the blood stuff, etc.
Yeah, and estrogen is absolutely needed as a man. Everybody says, "Oh, it's a female hormone, blah blah blah," but we need it as men. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about high estrogen risk on the next segment. We're also going to get into low estrogen risk. I'm going to explain why you need estrogen. And you actually need estrogen to build muscle and build strength. It's a very important hormone as well. Just because testosterone is a male hormone doesn't mean women don't need it. So why should you say, well, it's a female hormone, we don't need it? And we can make the argument, and I agree with this, that's better to have low estrogen than high estrogen. Better, when you're talking about health wise, I would rather, if you told me, Steve, you have to go with low estrogen or high estrogen the rest of your life, I would go with the low estrogen option because high estrogen is infinitely more dangerous to your long term health. All right. But at the end of the day, we can manipulate, and this is the point of this podcast, we can manipulate our estrogen levels. Today, the access to blood work is like never before. So, it's not like it was back in the 70s and 80s and even 90s when if you wanted to get blood work done, you'd have to go to a doctor, you'd have to do all this stuff. It would take like 2 3 weeks to get your results. Now you go into the lab, you either have a doctor's script or you can get your own script online, and you can come on the forum and you can ask me how to do that, or you can check out. I have a blood work article and blood work thread that you can dig up on the forum as well, where you can actually go get your blood work done on your own, where you don't even have to go to a doctor's appointment in America. Now, if you have good insurance, you have a good doctor that you're working with, they will write you out the blood work order, and you can go to the lab the next morning and get your blood drawn. You usually get the results in a couple days. So we have that, and they'll email you the results. This way you'll know where your numbers are. So we have access to knowing where estrogen levels are. We don't have to guess like they used to back in the day. And that's a big advantage. So the way guys used to do things, even in the 2000s, mobster, is they would go off feeling. Oh, I do I feel like I have high estrogen? Is my face looking bloated? Are my muscles looking fluffy on this cycle? Then yeah, my estrogen is too high. I gotta slay my estrogen back down. So around the late 80s, early 90s, they started coming up with ideas with how to get estrogen down. And they came up with different ideas, including using Nolvadex. And that was one of the early ways that they came up with how to control estrogen. And Nolvadex is not an AI, it is a Serm. It's a selective estrogen receptor modulator. It is not an aromatase inhibitor. So it was kind of a shitty way. It is a shitty way to control estrogen because all it's doing is it's blocking that feedback of estrogen going back into the pituitary glands. So what ends up happening a lot of times, what happened to a lot of those guys is they'd come off the cycle and their estrogen would rebound. So what we want to do in modern times, we want to use an AI, which we're going to get into later, to control estrogen. But the basis of this segment is blood work, blood work, blood work. And everybody's going to be different. Here's the thing. Here's the frustrating thing is at 30 years old, you could run so-and-so cycle, not have any estrogen issues. But then at 35 or 40, you could run the same exact cycle and have estrogen issues. And your AIs are going to affect you differently over time. So it is a little annoying. It's a little frustrating, but it's going to take trial and error. It's going to take blood work, and it's going to take adjusting to things as you get older, as your weight changes and all this stuff. A lot of people say, well, if you're a bigger guy, you're more prone to estrogen issues. It's not necessarily true. That is a good point, but it's not necessarily always true. So you can't just go by, well, I'm skinny. I've had clients who are 140, 150 pounds go on literally 90 milligrams a week of testosterone and they have estrogen problems. Why is that? It's just the way it is. It's just the way their body is. But 5 years later, they go on 200 milligrams a week of testosterone and they don't have estrogen issues. So our bodies are constantly changing. So you have to adjust. You have to adjust things. It's just like fishing. You go fishing
Yeah.
and you're fishing in a spot and you're not catching anything. Do you just sit there like a dumbass for 8 hours fishing in the same spot? Or do you pick your shit up and
Yeah.
walk a mile down the beach and cast in a different spot? And that's what you have to do. And when you're fishing on the beach, they say you should give it 15 minutes before you go. So you should immediately adjust things because the fish aren't there. The fish aren't there. You just sitting there and waiting for the fish to show up isn't going to work. It's the same thing with this. And we have the tools and we have the access to these Euro Pharma products, which allow you to be able to manipulate your estrogen levels like never before. And they're not expensive and they're very, very easy in tablet form. And
Yeah,
we're going to talk about
yeah.
that shortly.
Just to emphasize a point that Steve's made there, this is super, super important, guys. You will sometimes see, and these people are very, very lucky, it has to be said, Steve. You will sometimes see a person on a forum who runs testosterone and will make the statement something along the lines of, I've never had to use an AI. And if you're a new guy coming in, maybe newly listening to this information that we're giving you today about controlling your estrogen, you could be misinformed, shall we say, in thinking that the way that they're running their cycle, what they're doing, their choice of testosterone, etc., is okay for them, and therefore they look like me, it's okay for me. And that's a big, big mistake for various reasons. Number one, you've obviously got the individual response. Steve just pointed out, there's 140, 150 pounds, having estrogen issues, someone bigger, leaner, not having estrogen issues. An obvious thing is, Steve, would just be body fat, age, literally post puberty, peak of your male testosterone levels, the dropping off of your male testosterone levels as you age, which we've covered on other shows. Condition is obvious. Twin brothers, one lean at 300 pounds, one not lean at 300 pounds. I suspect the one that's not lean at 300 pounds is going to have more issues. Age, absolutely. As I said, with the drop off of your own natural testosterone levels, it's called HRT in women for a reason, because their hormones have changed. We talk about TRT on these shows quite a lot because male hormones, testosterone, will drop off as you age. And it's literally then, for example, that person could be lean, could have low body fat levels, as I just said, could be relatively young, but they might only be using 300 or 400 milligrams. And then the next cycle, they decide they're really going to go for it, Steve. They're going to pound it away. They go much higher than 400 milligrams, 6, 7, 800, 1,000 milligrams. Lo and behold, they have issues. Or they do a stack, or they're using multiple PEDs. You cannot say that it's an absolute given. You must monitor, and if at all possible. And Steve's just asked me about getting bloods in the UK. I know for a fact that I've posted about this on the forum, Steve. Believe one's called Valin something or other. But come onto the forum, either contact me via the forums or check my blood test post in the UK. I believe Eval, run by Dave Crossland, is one company, and there's at least two others that I've mentioned on the forum where you can get that done. I will reinforce the point that Steve made earlier in the show. It is so much easier than it was before. And like I've said about the price of PEDs, Steve, about steroids, it's also a hell of a lot cheaper. There are literally testosterone testing and blood testing companies now that just will literally tell you if you've got high or low testosterone. And you just pull a little bit of blood out, stick it in a vial, stick it off in a jiffy bag. It's all sealed up properly medically so it won't leak. And it's a specific label so the post office know what they're getting, and it goes to the lab, and you will get either an email or text message, never mind an actual letter in the post, Steve, back to you with very, very, very quickly. They're literally, that's all they do is test for these particular things, these particular contracted labs that they're using. So it's a lot quicker, a lot more efficient. And of course, if you want, you can go private and get the whole, every single thing tested for. And again, that is that much easier in the UK and in the US than what's ever been in the past. Like Steve said, back in the day, 9 times out of 10, Steve, they had zero clue. Even when you and I have discussed it, just to move on, the golden age, and Arnold Schwarzenegger et al., training out of Gold's Gym, worked with a local doctor, and he was monitoring them. He was friendly to bodybuilders. He was a fan of bodybuilding. He liked the fact these guys were coming to the office. They had limited access, as we said at the time, to, for example, AIs, as in fucking none, unlike the stuff that we've got now. But they did have a doctor they could work with who would monitor them for issues and so on and so forth. And again, they were very, very lucky. There was a handful of these doctors in the US at the time, Steve, that were that way inclined or friendly to bodybuilders. So the idea that you could get blood tests, that you could talk to a doctor, that he could monitor your bloods, and you could see what was going on was very, very limited back then. Maybe you.
Let's go over the high estrogen risks. And the first one we talk about is gynecomastia. Gyno is one of the worst things you can get from high estrogen. It's called bitch tits for a reason. It can be extremely embarrassing to walk around with man boobs. So I'm gonna give you a tip. Women who are into guys, when you take your shirt off, they want to touch a nice, rock hard pectoral chest. Nice, wide, hard pectoral chest. That's what they want to touch. They don't want to touch man boobs. If they wanted to touch man boobs, they'd go date a woman, okay? And then they could fondle the woman's breast. They don't want to feel that. So it's embarrassing to get that. And back in the day, Mobster, back in your day, 80s and 90s, guys would run testosterone, Dianabol, and they would end up with bitch tits. And it was fucking embarrassing. Um, Back then, they didn't really understand what it
Worse, Steve,
was. Yeah.
worse,
Yeah.
worse. Just sorry, just to bang this particular drum loud. Have we not seen on occasion X or Y member come onto the forums, not for a while, it has to be said, I'm squeezing my nipple and milk or something is coming out of my nipple. It's like the worst possible kind of gross example. And what's it, Fight Club, where the rock singer plays the fella with the man boobs in there. Guys, you really it's like the worst version, and it messes with your head. And estrogen being like that will mess with you anyway. So yeah, that's just gross. Obviously, surgery, etc., can be used to fix these particular things, and obviously medically treated. But we're very much of the stop it before it gets to that situation level, rather than wait until you get to that kind of level. But also, very quickly, Steve, top professional bodybuilders who could be arguably very, very lean everywhere and still have a very small touch of gyno. And some of those kind of sort of get themselves fixed before it becomes a problem by having the gland removed ahead of time. It's not an expensive operation and quite easy to recover from, unlike what it used to be. So yeah, there are things out there. With some of it, I'm sure you could Google this shit if you really want to. It's absolutely fucking gross. So we never want to be in that particular that situation. We want to avoid that. Hence today's show.
Yeah. Now, typically with gyno, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It typically takes time. It will take weeks and weeks, but sometimes it can be very, very quick, and come on. But for the most part, it takes time. So you've let your estrogen levels rise, and you've let it continue to rise without getting it taken care of, and this is a mistake. So you have to make sure that you don't let it get out of hand in the first place, and that's the crux of the situation. But at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, like I said, because we've seen guys in the past, it's been a quick process. It take like a week and they end up with feeling a lump, or as Mobster said, they're squeezing their nipples and stuff is coming up. So it's really not a laughing matter. I've seen guys over the years come on the forum and they laugh about it. Like, oh, I'm squeezing my nipples and milk, liquid is coming out. Ha ha ha. It's funny. It's not funny, dude, because that means your estrogen in your body is extremely high. And this means you're opening yourself up to other problems. The next one is water weight retention. And this is a domino effect of problems because when you're retaining a lot of water, it's not only unsightly, like you get the moon face, you get the fluffy muscles, the vascularity disappears. You don't have that lean look. Your stomach gets distended, um, and it has a domino effect of internal issues that's going on, having to carry that much water around. It's like carrying jugs of water on your back all day, 24/7, even while you sleep, and it does have health consequences. So touch on water weight retention, Monster. I've seen guys in the gym
Yeah, yeah,
who I'm familiar with go from like really like lean, and then I'll see them over the course of weeks end up with a lot of water retention, and then I'll see them a few weeks later, water retention gone. So I know that they were running, like Dianabol. They were running
yeah,
Dianabol,
yeah, yeah.
and they were getting a lot of water retention. They're running tests,
No
and then they came
AI,
off
no
the
no
cycle. Yeah,
Serm. Yep.
and they came off the cycle, and the water retention went away.
In a perverse way, and I've said this on shows before, Steve. Sometimes that bloat, that just as an example, and I've used this on multiple shows talking about Debo. I said that some of my first cycles ever, with Dynabrol, the quote unquote breakfast of champions. And I typically ran, especially back in the day, Steve, 30 milligrams a day for 4 to 8 weeks. It was 8 weeks back in the day. And I would know from experience from the first cycle to the second cycle to the third cycle. I think they were all debol, certainly the first two, 100%. It's a long time ago. uh, I would put on £10 and I would keep roughly 5 to 6 pounds of that. So you can talk, you can absolutely say that I was almost certainly of that £10, £4 must have been, wow, must have been. My head's kind of big already, Steve. So you don't really notice much of a sort of a moon face, but I have seen this in other individuals, and very much in my strongman strength training buddies back in the day when I was living in Gloucester. You could tell when someone was using depot. Now, the perverse way, as I said, that extra bulk, some of which must have been water, is favourable for leverage purposes in terms of strength. On the other hand, because these were strongmen, strength buddies, powerlifters, whatever, that's fine in a way. It's not a problem. But it's a big problem if you want to look like a muscular bodybuilder. And specifically, I want to address this as well, a lean muscular bodybuilder. So recently, just the last year or two, and it might be a sign of my age as well, Steve, I see a lot of younger, lean and in shape bodybuilders. When I say young, I'm talking about under 35, doing what's called mini cuts because they've put on a little bit of extra tissue with a tiny bit of water, a tiny bit of body fat, and they lose the veins, as Steve said, or their abs start to disappear a little tiny bit, and they'll literally do 2 to 3 weeks, which almost seems pointless in my mind, of just stripping away that superfluous water and certainly any body fat that they've gained, because it's a bit of a head fuck. And ironically, as I said earlier on, the estrogen and or testosterones can affect your mood, the way that you see yourself, and so on and so forth. So yeah, look, absolutely. And look, back in the day, especially late 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, Steve, the moon face thing, and I've seen examples posted from when I first came along around 1990 online, seeing what was out there, and via the books, etc., that were available. The issue of water retention, the issue of moon face, the issue of excessive bloat, let's put it that way, was a big fucking deal. And you could absolutely, if you lined up 10 steroid using bodybuilders, you could kind of say, Anavar, low dose testosterone, every fucking peptide and testosterone known to mankind, motherfucker down there's using, he's going to be using anadrol, or that one's using Debo. And you could kind of tell. You could kind of tell, especially if someone was lean and then they got a little bit out of shape. But it was that relatively quick thing as well, Steve. And it wasn't because they fucked their diet up or they changed their training. It's because they I've talked about, just from my own example again, how quickly I responded when I was using fake Debo and how much weight I put on in a very short period of time when the legit real Debo turned up. And I've described it thus. I'd been given some Debo to carry me over because I'd made the one and only mistake in my cycle life of not being prepared for a cycle. So I literally had to get this fake Debo. We didn't know that at the time, of course. Thank you very much for free. This will tide you over till your stuff turns up. It was enough in there for 2 weeks. 10 days of using a fake shit, no response, no response, no response. And then the real stuff arrives on the Friday. And between Friday and Monday evening, I put on £4. So £4 in 4 fucking days on the legit. Now, how much of that was water, Steve? Probably about 80 or 90 fucking percent. There would be some anabolic response, but not massively so, not in 4 days. So that very first 4 days, I guarantee most of that was water weight. And again, what else, Steve? We were super limited. The access to AIs, even up until recent, just 20 odd years ago, to literally Novodex was all that was in the books I was reading. There was nothing else available. But I work in knowledge of, and this comes from these shows, other shows, and specifically discussing aromatase inhibitors, discussing estrogen issues, thousands upon thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, or even millions of users across all the forums over the last 2 decades. And so our practical understanding from literal use and actual issues and people posting up their bloods is way better than it used to be before, Steve.
All right, so let's go to the next one, Mobster, and that would be mood changes. And mood changes make a big deal because with mood changes, when you have high estrogen, it can change the way you act in different ways. Another one is low energy. When you're carrying around jugs around all day, it will lead to lower energy as your body gets exhausted easier. It's going to hurt your endurance for sure. You'll notice if you try to run, it gets harder to run. Imagine having to run with jugs of water on your back. Well, that's what's happening. You're carrying all this excess water weight, and then when you weight train too, it hurts your workout. Now, if you're a strength athlete, as Mobster said, it can give you a little bit of an advantage because you weigh more. You're able to push and pull more weight. You get more leverage, as Mobster said. But if you're, training for bodybuilding or aesthetics, and you like to do high repetitions, you like to push, to fatigue on your workouts and do supersets and do drop sets, you'll notice that your endurance is not good with the weight training. And Mobster, you can chime in if you want any of these.
I was just thinking, you mentioned endurance there, Steve. If you're a cardiovascular, if you're a CrossFitter, Debo's the last thing you should be using. Even, I mean, you've talked about this when it comes to Anavar, but I think Debo applies here, Steve, and the estrogen issue applies here. The pumps. If you're carrying the sheer volume of water, isn't just what we would call bloat in terms of water underneath the skin and around the joints, like I talked about earlier for the leverage, but it would literally sometimes be the hydration, if you like, the cell volumization in your blood. So literally because of the water in your body as well, of course, it becomes in a perverse way more capable of doing these things, but it's not a positive. And gives you worse pumps, so you can't carry on through the workout because the pump has crippled you. I've actually seen Australian members of our forum talking about having to stop a set early because the pump was so fucking bad, which some people like. But again, that's the difference between a comfortable pump and an uncomfortable one. The one that Steve said about the mood, I touched on this a little bit earlier. We sometimes forget, and especially as men, that we are hormonal. We are. Watch a rom-com, get your blood tested. Let me give very good example. And I've asked, is this how hormonal men are? I think this study was done absolutely years ago, Steve, but it's quoted a few times. And it referenced the difference of testosterone levels, which were quite small, but significant enough to be remarked upon. And it was literally done at a football stadium. They got people to volunteer to come up and get their blood tested, pinprick test, something like this. And it was the difference between the testosterone levels of the fans of the team that had lost versus the fans of the team that had won. And significantly, if small, the fans that his team had lost had lower testosterone levels, and the fans of the team who'd won had higher testosterone levels. That sounds stupid because you go, how can watching a fucking match and being disappointed with the outcome of the match affect their testosterone levels? Because we are hormonal. Men are hormonal. There's almost a joke, and I touched upon the rom-com thing earlier on. If you're one of the signs, in a perverse kind of way, yes, it just because we're being a little bit emotional and human and admitting that we like this kind of shit. But arguably, one of the signs of high estrogen can be stupid stuff like crying at fucking Bambi getting killed in the woods, or crying because you watched a rom-com with your girlfriend, or literally being that little tiny bit more upset than normal. Men are hormonal. It will affect your mood. And again, if you're self-aware, as we try to be as bodybuilders, we try to be analytical with our diets. Is our training working? Is our diet working? Am I doing well with this level of testosterone I'm taking? Am I gaining muscle? Am I getting bigger? Am I more muscular? We should have a small amount of self-awareness in terms of our mood. And is my mood because I'm sad, or is my mood because low, or whatever, a bit weepy, because my estrogen levels are getting out of control? It sounds like on the bodybuilding forums, on the forums that we're on, associated with a show like Evolutionary, it's kind of a macho environment. But you will sometimes see real shit, pets and people dealing with deaths and marriages and whatever else. And an open and honest approach will sometimes reveal that the reason why X or Y feels like that is because their estrogen levels are
All
a
right.
bit out of line. And we can bring that in line. I'm giving you some
Yeah.
tips.
So high blood pressure is another one. It's a result of water retention and also inflammation can lead to stroke or blood clots. So When you're carrying around all that extra water, it's just going to put more pressure on your heart, obviously. That's just how it is. I don't care if it's water, muscle, fat. The more weight you carry, the more pressure you're putting on your heart. Sleep problems. This is another one. This is a domino effect of high estrogen. This can ruin your sleep. We see a lot of people complain of sleep problems on cycle. This is one of the reasons because their estrogen gets too high. The last one, there's a lot of different ones, but I tried to touch on the main ones, but this is one that never gets talked about enough. And it's because you can't see it. It's one of those things where you have to either have an autopsy done or you have to have a special test for it, and that's cancer. And this is the big one. And it goes on inside your body. We all have cancer cells in our body, and cancer cells, they feed on estrogen in the body. So this is why cancer survivors, we all know people who've had cancer, family or friends, they're put on anti-estrogen drugs in a lot of situations so that their cancer has less of a chance of returning. Because if their estrogen levels get too high, then their chance of getting the cancer increases. So we see that with people like with females, for example, who've had breast cancer, they'll be put on anti-estrogen drugs like Nolvadex. It's a very safe, low side effect thing, and they'll have to go take that for 3, 4, 5 years just to make sure that that cancer does not return after they have it cut out or after their chemotherapy or whatnot. So these are things to think about. A lot of people don't think about this stuff. They don't think about what goes on inside the body. In bodybuilding, we've kind of bastardized it enough, Mobster, where we're worried about what we look like on the outside, but we ignore what goes on the inside.
Yes.
And if the big bodybuilder who's on stage, who's huge, he looks fantastic on the outside, yes, but on the inside, how does he look? In a lot of situations, it's very dreadful the way he looks on the inside, where his organs are, the cancer, and all this other stuff that's forming in his body. It looks very, very ugly. So we have to be aware. Just because you can't feel it, just because you can't see it, just because you might not think it's happening, and just because it might not show up on blood work, doesn't mean that there are things going on in your body that you're not aware of. So people who say, well, it doesn't matter, I feel great on high estrogen. I run 500 milligrams of testosterone a week. I don't even run an AI. I don't need it. I already had my gyno surgery. I had my glands taken out. I don't have to worry about estrogen. Yeah, you do. You still have to worry about it because there's other things that happen in the body besides gynecomastia to think about when it comes to high estrogen. Monster, touch on that really quick and then we'll move on to low estrogen risks.
I've used this analogy before, Steve, and just also men can get breast cancer, by the way. It's more common, of course, in women, but men can get it. And we know that they can get it. I've seen examples on Google, if not on the forums. One of the things I use the example of, Steve, is a sports car analogy, and it's quite simple, guys. The sports car looking amazing in a photograph, or as it drives past you on a motorway, is one thing. But if there's black smoke coming out the back, there's something going on. The girlfriend, when we drive down to London to visit my mum or whatever, Steve, will always top up the tyres with air pressure, top up the oil, make sure the water's filled up, and so on and so forth. She's making sure that not only can the car get to where to be, it's not going to break down. And we need to think sometimes that in regards to our longevity and less than a superficial in terms of long-term health, etc., when it comes to your body. So again, it's the difference between being able to get lean and muscular on junk food and on organic, locally bred, nicely produced food. It's a difference between taking testosterone, being the size of a house, but having really bad acne because your body's throwing out fucking hormones and oily skin and so on and so forth. So, and it's also, I think, arguably, Steve, a little bit superficial, and we've all been there, seen there, and done that. The difference between being younger and living in the moment versus being a little bit older with responsibilities, with a missus, with kids, with whatever, with a fucking mortgage, all the usual shit. And you start to think long term, you start to think about retirement, you start to think about career and so on. And so when it comes to your body, it can be very easy to get stuck on the now and how I look in the now, but we want you to have a long, lean and muscular or strong or whatever the fuck it is physique for years, Steve, for decades. So we talk about subjects like this because we want you to have the best outcome for the longest period of time and not just look amazing today, like you used to.
All right, so if the flip side is low estrogen risks, And this happens when you go overboard with your anti-estrogen drugs, which we're going to get into in a bit. And the first one you got to worry about is losing strength and muscle. So there's a reason why when you go to a powerlifting competition or you're in a powerlifting competition, they have weight classes because the more you weigh, the better advantage you have at moving those weights. That's just science, right? So when I used to compete as a power lifter, I would usually be 2, 3 pounds above my where I should be. And then the day of, I'd fast all day. And then right before weigh-in, we'd put sweaters on and we'd run around and sweat as much as we can and wipe every drop of sweat off our body and piss and shit and get everything out of our body. And then we go weigh in. And then after we'd weigh in, then we would eat something quick. Like a candy bar or something like that. Now, obviously, there's a lot better ways to do it in modern times. I wouldn't eat a candy bar. You see, as a weightlifting judge, you see kids standing around for hours and hours at state meets because there's so many people there, right? So these poor kids have to stand around for hours and hours. So they'll chew on a candy bar, or they'll chew on jelly beans, or like what are those things called, mobster? Those that stick to your teeth. What are they
The
called?
ones I've heard guys using
Gummy
Haribo gummy
bears.
bears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gummy bears. Yeah. So they'll do that and they'll suck on it and they'll chew on it and they'll try to get their sugar up because they're just standing around doing nothing for hours waiting for their turn. So you want to get that quick glycogen increase to kind of give you an advantage, and kind of you want to retain water right before you're about to lift, but you don't want to retain your water before your weigh in because then you wouldn't be able to make weight and then you'd be screwed. So anyway, long story short, it does give you an advantage having estrogen when it comes to muscle and strength. So you do need normal estrogen levels on a cycle to develop, muscle and strength. So you don't want to crash your estrogen levels. Another thing is low libido, or you want to touch on that a bit, Mobster, before I move on to the next one?
No, Steve's 100%
Yeah.
correct. So one of the examples back in the day, my old business partner Mike did this. Steve was making weight for a 105 class. I believe England's strongest man under 105, which is 231 pounds. And one of the tricks they do in lifting is please have the weigh in the night before, as opposed to some events where it's the day or the hour or 2 hours before the event. Huge pain in the ass. And we had people that put on 8, 9, 10 pounds. Mike, in this example, you had to weigh in on the day, like 2 hours before the event, when they were still setting up and the athletes are queuing up to be weighed, make the weight, etc., etc. And Mike made the mistake of immediately after the weigh-in consuming half a gallon or more. I think it was 7 pints, whatever the fuck that is, liters, etc., of glucose type drinks. And he said it was a huge mistake because it was sloshing around in his gut
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the first event, all that water there. So it was a bad idea. So look, it's manipulated. The guys do it on the thing that Steve just said again. Yes, as I touched upon earlier on, sex drive, as Steve said quite correctly, the idea that high testosterone gives you a higher sex drive is accurate, but in combination with a proper level of estrogen.
Yeah.
Zero will fuck with your mood. It won't make you some sort of weird sex monster. It's quite the opposite. So again, reminded what I said earlier on, Steve, about being hormonal. A little bit of estrogen is actually good for your sex life. And again, you will notice this, guys. The difference between being in love, not being in love, new relationships, honeymoon periods, multiple partners, etc., and having peak testosterone levels, and then long term. As an example, Stephen, I think there's actually a really good scientific example here just before we move on. And it's the difference between being the early honeymoon period of a relationship and the sex drive of a man when the woman has had her baby or the children are very young. And I've actually seen something to the effect, I believe there's a couple of studies on this, where the quote unquote nesting, as in you're settled into a relationship, you've got kids, you're out at work, you're doing all this shit, you will have a lower sex drive as well as the woman compared to how it was before, because that's actually useful in society, in humankind, for you to look after your kids, for you to be a good father, rather than the stud that fucks the women, gets them pregnant, and walks the fuck away. So there's actually hormonal reasons for it too.
Yeah, and then the last one on this is depression. and we see people go into depression when their estrogen levels drop too much. And why is this? It's because estrogen helps with neurotransmitters in the brain like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And at the end of the day, we see this with people who have depressive problems. They'll have to take medication, and the medication will help balance those neurotransmitters in the brain. So if you're throwing off those neurotransmitters, obviously, if you're more prone to depression, you can definitely have it rear its ugly head when you get low estrogen. And I personally, one time, I had a gynecomastia scare, and it was around the time where I had this like there was a huge shortage of AIs going on, and I didn't get access to an AI for a few weeks because I was waiting to get it. And what happened was during that time, my estrogen got out of control. So what I ended up doing is once I got the AIs, I ended up slamming my estrogen down like immediately. I was taking Letra, I was taking 8X, I was taking Aromacin, I was taking everything, right? Just to get my estrogen down because I didn't want gyno. And I definitely experienced this. I experienced the low depression, the low libido, and all this stuff. And my girlfriend at the time noticed it as well. And I had to explain it to her. I was like, look, I'd rather go through like a week or two of this than end up with bitch tits. And she's like, yes, yeah, you're right. I get it. I get it. So this is something that definitely I've experienced. So definitely happens. So it's very, very important that you don't get to the point where you let your estrogen get out of control first, and you always have your ancillaries on hand, which we're going to talk to. And Euro Pharma
Yes.
has all the ancillaries you need, which we're going to get to shortly. But
Let
let's
me just touch on
go
that very briefly, Steve. And I've
ahead.
seen this a couple of times, and this is one of those little bugbears of mine where I would be quite forthright and direct about it on the forums. And it's mostly not necessarily for the benefit of the actual member, but for those reading. Don't wait until you have a fucking problem and then have to fix that problem. Because by the time you've seen the beginnings of gyno or bloat or whatever, you're already in that situation. So the person there is favored not using an AI, but they might have an AI on hand, or worse, Steve, they've had to buy it and they wait for it to come while they're having the issue, versus the person reading going, hey, hang on, Mobster might be right. I should have the fucking AI here, even if I don't want to have to use it, rather than wait for it to come in the post from my approved source like Euro Pharmacies. I don't want to. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's like having a toolkit to fix your car, but it's in the garage at home and you're 300 miles away. You're already fucked, guys. The toolbox needs to be in the car. So in this situation, do not wait until there's an issue. Prevent the issue, or at least have the product with you on hand at the very least. Don't wait until it's a problem and then have to get hold of it or whatever. Again, from your pharmacies.
Let's go over 4 different steroids from Euro Pharma that can cause estrogen issues. And it doesn't mean you have to avoid them. It just means that you will definitely want to keep your aromatase inhibitors on hand in case, and you definitely want to start using them, as Mobster said, right away. Testosterone obviously is the first one. When you run testosterone at any dosage above what your body would naturally produce, it will aromatize into estrogen at a faster rate than it leaves your system. So I hope that makes sense. So this is going to result in excess estrogen. So any dosage typically higher than 150 milligrams a week, and the higher the dose, the more estrogen is going to happen. So if you go in there and you do 500 milligrams, 750 milligrams, 1,000 milligrams or more, you're going to have a lot of aromatase of estrogen in your body. It's going to happen, and it's not going to leave your system fast enough where your body can balance it and get rid of it. So it's gonna increase and increase and increase, and you'll definitely have estrogen issues. You want to try it out? Go on 1,000 milligrams of testosterone a week with no AI and see what happens. See how fast you retain water. See how fast you blow it up. It's going to happen. Dianabol as well. And Dianabol, the problem with Dianabol, and where it gets people in trouble on Dianabol, is that because it isn't oral, it has a very short half life, so it's in and out of your system a lot quicker than a testosterone, which typically people use a longer ester of testosterone, which is more of a slow release. Well, Dianabol releases quickly. So with Dianabol, you're going to have estrogen issues very, very fast because it aromatizes very, very fast in the body, and your body does not have enough time to get rid of it. So even as a dosage of 10 or 20 milligrams of Dianabol will result in very quick water retention. And then look, a lot of people want that. A lot of people want that big boost in estrogen. They want that water retention. They want to get stronger. They want to get bigger on it. But it also comes with that risk. And we're not saying don't use Dianabol. Dianabol is loved. Mobster loves Dianabol. But you got to use it and be aware of the estrogen issues, and you're going to need to start taking an AI right away, typically with Dianabol. Go ahead, Mobster. Touch on Dianabol, your experience.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I mean, look, one of the things that occurs to me, and Steve's telling you the worst examples. Look, and I've touched upon the change in body condition, hormonal levels throughout your lifetime. The trick here is, I mean, one of the things we said on many shows, actually, never mind the trick, is that you don't have to only use this PED or that PED because that's all you can get. That was the case back in the day. It isn't the case anymore. You can pretty much, again, with Euro pharmacies, get what you fucking need. And it's the difference sometimes, Steve, between dosages. A person who says, I don't need an AI of 300 milligrams would absolutely need an AI of 500 milligrams, all other things being equal. So, yeah, absolutely, fucking Steve. The idea, and again, a debol would be a good example. Again, someone that's super lean might, and it would be a very small percentage, we generalize for the benefit of the majority of our listeners. Someone might be super lean, might be perfectly fine, 4 weeks Debo at 30 milligrams a day, but absolutely need an AI at 50 milligrams. This is the difference between using one steroid and having issues and another steroid and not having issues. Understanding from experience your changing condition. For example, Steve being on 500 milligrams at 8% versus being on 500 milligrams, again, of testosterone. And normally, the 8% having zero issues, but 11, 12, 15% body fat, suddenly they've got an issue. So you need to understand is this is quite, lots of people will work with coaches, lots of people approach Steve for a consult. And this is the reason why quite often we're asking for photographs of how you look online so we can look at your body fat and give you better choices. You don't have that limitation now where you only can use Debo or only can use testosterone. You have access to lots of things. And even as a silly example, and it's another reason why we talk about approved sources, making sure that you get what you think you're getting versus, for example, with Anavar back in the day, Steve, being given Debo, which you think is Anavar, and wondering why you've got estrogen issues. Because all this shit used to go on. Doesn't really happen now, and it certainly doesn't happen with companies like Euro Pharmacies. So yeah, it's that degree of being aware. Don't be afraid to ask us for advice, and don't limit yourself to one steroid or another steroid when there are other choices. For example, the difference between a shorter ester and a longer ester. Being open and honest with your condition, saying if you think you might have the issues with gyno, saying if you think you've got issues with water retention, not being embarrassed to ask. This stuff is really, really important. And again, it's the difference between having a good cycle and a great cycle, being successful versus, as we've seen occasionally, Steve, people using legit products, but their diets are poor, their training's poor, oh, the steroids were shit. No, you ate poorly, you weren't out drinking, you were doing stuff that's going to cause your estrogen to rise, like alcohol, and you just didn't put the fucking effort in because we know that the products you're using are great. So it's important to understand these things. Hopefully, with all the different shows, including this one, we're giving you that information to develop an understanding. And again, a little bit of self-awareness, and don't be afraid to ask for advice, Steve.
All right, so the next two are a little tricky. Ment is one that Euro Pharma also sells, and a lot of people like it. A lot of people like it because it's such a great bulker and it's such a great one when it comes to adding a lot of size very, very quickly. But it does aromatize into estrogen very fast as well. And a big mistake that people use when they use Ment is they stack testosterone with it. So, not a good idea. You're just going to end up with a huge watery mess, and it's going to be very hard to control estrogen. So, if you're going to use Ment, don't use testosterone with it. Use a drying steroid with it. So use Primo with it, for example. That would make a hell of a lot more sense. Or use Anavar with it or Mastron with it. That will help balance the estrogen more. Anadrol, very tricky oral steroid because it doesn't aromatize into estrogen at all since it is a DHT derivative, but it does bind to estrogen receptors. So be aware that an AI is not going to help you with controlling estrogen on anadrol. So if you're prone to estrogen issues, you're best to just avoid it completely. This is why anadrol is a bad idea if you're new to steroids because you're not going to know if you have estrogen issues until you actually, experiment with testosterone and Dianabol first, and then if you do with androgen.
Yes.
So really quick, Monster, we got to get
Just
into the
just
next
on the
stuff. Yeah,
anadrol
yeah.
one, Steve, I've mentioned this on other shows. Some people, if they're lean, adding lean muscle on anadrol is entirely possible. And yet I've also heard of people putting on 21 pounds with very, very short period of time. And if it's 21 pounds, Steve, that's an extreme example that a lot of that's going to be fucking water. And again, it comes down to the individual response to you and your diet, your training, your genetics, etc., etc. So for some people, it's a really fucking bad idea because there's no way on earth someone who's new to training, and that's what I heard in the example I was referring to, had put on 21 pounds. There's no fucking way on earth at least 5 or 6 pounds of that, if not more, wasn't fucking water. I'd have to argue, Steve, it'd be closer to 10 pounds. I'd want to see the end fucking result, not what you put on. Let's see what you look like now, and we'll fucking tell you. So yeah, absolutely. For some users, it's a really bad idea.
All right, how to control estrogen on cycle? What does Euro Pharma have? And at the end of the day, you don't have to be scared to run any of these aromatizing compounds. Okay, you don't have to be scared as long as you're doing it the right way. And part of doing it the right way is knowing what to stack in in your cycle. So Euro Pharma has you covered with the best anti-estrogen drugs out there. Let's start with the ancillaries. The favorite AIs out there, Aromacin, Arimidex, and Letrozole. And I would strongly recommend always going with Aromacin. It's a suicide aromatase inhibitor, meaning it will disable that estrogen enzyme, but it will also permanently disable it. So you don't have to worry about estrogen rebound. So Aromacin is always the number one option. It's the most modern AI. It's the most, it's like getting the new iPhone out there. It's the best one, okay? And it also helps with IGF-1, which is a completely different topic, but it does really, really good. It's a gentle AI. Arimidex would be the second option. It is also a gentle AI, but it is not a suicide AI. So that is the disadvantage it has versus Aromacin. And then the third one is Letrozole. And Letrozole is one you can have on hand in case of emergency. It's not one you want to use. There's some douchebags, goofballs on social media. These are these old school guys, quote unquote old school guys. They consider themselves old school, but it's not old school. You're old school, mobster. They're just stupid, and they'll go and they'll recommend taking Letro on a cycle, and they're idiots. Letro should only be used in an emergency. If you have like I said the story earlier where I had an emergency where gyno was coming on and I was getting really concerned. In that situation, you run the Letro, okay? But you never run Letro unless it's an emergency situation and it's a dire situation. So save the Letro, have it on hand, but hopefully you'll never have to use it. And it's $30 or $40 or $50, whatever, well spent as kind of an insurance policy that you have in your closet in case something happens in the future. The last one, Novadex. And Novadex, it's not an AI. It is a Serm. I talked about this earlier. But the reason I include it here is it's also a good one to have on hand because it's very useful as part of an anti-gyno protocol, stacking with Letro. So if you came to me and say, Steve, I'm developing gyno, please help me. What's the best thing to do? I would say Letro and Novadex together. But absolutely, it's not something you want to use to control estrogen in a normal environment. So again, just like the Letro, only use it to control estrogen in an emergency situation and always stack it with Letro in that situation. So even those of you sitting here right now who with existing gyno, and you're like, well, I want to try something before I have to resort to surgery because surgery can cost money. I think some of the numbers that guys on the forum have said lately, Mobster, are anywhere from 12 to 15,000 to go to a good quality doctor and have the gyno removed permanently.
Yes.
So you want
Yes.
to avoid paying that. You could spend way, 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 way less Way
Yes.
less doing a anti-gyno protocol using Letro and Nolvadex. You can try that. Give it an honest shot. It's going to suck. You're going to get those low estrogen side effects I talked about earlier, but it's a hell of a lot better than spending that kind of money and going through your surgery, having another human being open you up.
Cheapest I've heard, Steve, is £4,000 in a long weekend in Poland, which is about $6,000 there or thereabouts. And you will spend some period of recovery coming back and you need to take medication.
Yeah.
I've just had a very quick look, Steve. The Rimidex 1 milligram options on Euro Pharmacies, Letrozole 2.5 milligram option on Euro Pharmacies, Aromasin a 20 milligram option
Yeah.
again on Euro Pharmacies,
And
and
again,
finally Novedex at 20
with the
milligrams.
dosing, people ask me this all the time. You've got to experiment with the dosing. There is no one size fits all with this. It depends on what you're running, how much you're running, and it depends on your body. So, generally, I use Aromasin as an example, okay? Because this is the
Yeah.
one I recommend. I would say if you're running, let's say a 500 milligram testosterone cycle a week, just testosterone, with the Aromasin, I would do probably 10 milligrams 3 times a week. But you may only need 10 milligrams twice a week, and you may need 10 milligrams 4 times a week. Everybody's going to be different. You've got to experiment. That's where blood work comes in, and that's where experience comes in, and that's where adjustments come in. Now, let's talk about some steroids on Euro Pharma that they sell that can help control estrogen. And the three that come to mind, Mobster, maybe you can add to this list: Masteron, Primobolan, and Proviron. And we've seen situations where running even 500 milligrams of testosterone and then doing Masteron with it at 500 milligrams will actually counteract the estrogen levels enough where people don't need an AI. So again, you got to experiment with it. I'm not like that. If I run 500 milligrams of testosterone, you better believe I'm going to run an AI. I'm not going to depend on another steroid to help. So for me, that doesn't work, but for some of you out there, it's going to work. So again, you got to experiment. You don't want to end up slamming down your estrogen because you're running the Masteron and then you're running an AI on top of it. So you've got to experiment with these Euro Pharma products and see what works well for you. Most of the guys seem to really perform, really have good experiences by using some of these because they do work at competing for those estrogen receptors and causing estrogen not to get out of whack in the first place. So it's a really good idea to stack some of these steroids with your aromatizing compounds. I've seen people do Proviron with Dianabol. I've seen people do T-Bol with Dianabol. Any of these DHT derivatives do a good job, aside from Anadrol, of course, of helping drop down your estrogen levels. Mobster touched on that, and then talk
I'll
about
tell you what I think is
Europharma. Yeah.
important here, guys, is the difference between, and we recommend this more and more and more now, the difference between what we say doing a lean gain or a lean mass gain cycle versus an out and out mass gain cycle. And that's just literally the idea of adding 5 or 6 pounds of tissue rather than trying to add 10 or 15 or 20 pounds of tissue. Over time, this will be a better way to do things. I've made a note here, Steve, literally just 3 notes here. One is the difference between dosage, and as Steve said earlier on, and I mentioned it twice already, the idea of 3 to 500 milligrams of testosterone versus doing 1,000 milligrams. And Steve gave you that example. And the last one on this, Steve, before we talk about your pharmacist himself, is condition. You will absolutely, all things being equal, genetics, medical visuals, etc., set to one side. If you are fat, if you are out of condition, if your body fat percentage is too high, if you have pre-existing issues, and then you go on cycle, you're way more likely to have estrogen issues than not. That's just the case. It's kind of obvious when you think about it. So we actually did a show recently, Steve, where we said, going on trend when you're 30% body fat. Going on any of these steroids that are bad for you when you're 30% body fat is like asking for estrogen issues. It's fucking obvious. So guys, the leaner you are, the leaner your gains are, the lower your dosage are, the shorter your cycles are, the less likely you are to suffer with problems in the long term. Why don't we talk about companies like Euro Pharma again and again and again? Look, the simple fact, just for example, talking about the AIs, talking about the Serm that we've discussed today, is they have what you fucking need. Literally having what you need. I came online probably late 80s, early 90s, Steve. I think we had a computer in the office I worked in, home computer around 1990. So I've been online for 35 fucking years, and my interest in bodybuilding started back in 1980. So I was reading about steroids and looking at bodybuilders, and especially when I was, I think, when this is now, this would be the late night 80s, early 90s, when I started to be thinking about using steroids. What we had available then versus what we got available now. So the simple fact that Euro Pharmacies has what you need, has all of these AI aromatase inhibitors, has the Serm there. The only thing I could get back in the day was Novodex. Literally, the books that I was reading, Paul Borison and Mick Hart, were only discussing Novodex, Steve. The others weren't even available. I think literally the development of breast cancer drugs and bodybuilders hooking into that made you realize that there might be better options out there that could control estrogen. The idea of gaining loads of mass in your season and so on and so forth. So literally the range of products, the quality of products, the fact that these products are tested, and I've said this again before, bears repeating, in-house, by them sending out to an external lab and by customers like you. The way, just example right now, on both the Euro Pharmacy site and one of their top resellers, they've got a bunch of stuff which is discontinued, and they're selling all that off, and everything's about to be restocked. And the reason for that is they only want to sell what you need in the market. What is going to sell to you in the quality is going to sell to you from a company, I believe, like Euro Pharmacies has been around 27 years. Their number one reseller has been around well over a decade. These companies are putting out these products for you, and it's no bullshit. There's no fluff. There's no sort of silly products that you won't use, etc. That's all. Anything that's like that doesn't sell is gone. And they are constantly looking to update and tweak, whether that's the information on the labels, whether it's the way that the site works for you as a customer, so you can see what you're getting, giving you guidance on how to dose these products and so on and so forth. And then obviously working with us on Evolutionary, allowing these podcasts to take place, so to put this information out there. So, like I said earlier on, Steve, you're getting the absolute best results from your cycle, and seeing overall that you don't want these kind of issues with estrogen, and they want your cycle results to be good, because it's good for them as a company, it's good for us putting this information out, and we want ultimately for you to be doing this stuff for a long time, as healthy as possible. And who wants to spend $12,000 fucking dollars getting it all fixed, Steve? Fuck that shit. Let's buy another car or something. Please note, just to finish on, guys, if you think we're right or we're wrong, and anything we've discussed that you don't agree with, or you've had issues with estrogen, maybe even gyno, come onto the forums, let us know in the comments below. We're always going to be interested, and we can update and correct any mistakes we've made in future podcasts. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.